Gov. Philip D. Murphy of New Jersey started a news conference on Saturday with a moment of silence for the lives lost, more than 800 people, in the state's coronavirus outbreak.
Hours earlier, Gov. Andrew M. Cuomo of New York compared a jump in cases on Long Island to a fire spreading, and said that New Jersey has a serious problem.
Though New York City remains the nation's epicenter for the coronavirus outbreak with thousands of new cases every day, officials are increasingly concerned about emerging hot spots near the city.
Citing coastal communities increasingly crowded by those fleeing other hotspots, Mr. Murphy announced that New Jersey would move to make it easier for municipalities or counties to block rentals to transient guests or seasonal tenants for the duration of the crisis, including at hotels and motels.
On Long Island, a rapid increase in cases brought New York City's share of the statewide cases down to 65%, from 75%. It raised questions about the continuing migration of the city's residents to second homes in beach communities or areas of the Hudson Valley, though Mr. Cuomo said he did not know if that kind of movement was contributing to the increase in cases on Long Island.
The challenge of stopping transmission from hot spots is widespread. Rhode Island's governor tried to enforce a 14-day quarantine for New Yorkers by having law enforcement officers go door to door searching for anyone from the state and pull over those with New York license plates. Florida's governor mandated a similar quarantine for anyone flying in from New York.
Mr. Murphy announced that there had been 200 more deaths in New Jersey since Friday, bringing that state's total to 846, which, he noted, was more than the number of New Jersey residents who died in the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks.
Here are some other updates from Mr. Cuomo's and Mr. Murphy's briefings.
Deaths in New York State, 3,565, up from 2,935 on Friday morning.
Confirmed cases in New York State, 113,704, up from 102,863. In New York City, 63,306, up from 57,169.
Hospitalized in New York State, 15,905, up from 14,810.
Deaths in New Jersey, 846, up from 646 on Friday.
Confirmed cases in New Jersey, 34,125, up from 29,895.
Hospitalized in New Jersey, more than 4,000, up from just over 3,000.
With the coronavirus having claimed more than 3,560 lives in New York, Mr. Cuomo warned on Saturday that the state was still days away from the peak of its outbreak.
Nobody can tell you the number at the top of the mountain, Mr. Cuomo said, but he estimated that it would be in the 7-day range. He said the state was not prepared for that point.
At his daily briefing in Albany, Mr. Cuomo also offered signs that many New Yorkers were overcoming the virus. For instance, he said, 2/3 of the people who had been hospitalized after reporting coronavirus-related symptoms have been discharged.
We are all in the battle here, he added.
Mr. Cuomo said New York was counting on 85,000 health care volunteers, about 22,000 of them from out of state, to assist with the growing number of patients. He also signed an executive order on Saturday to allow medical students who have not yet graduated to practice medicine in an effort to provide reinforcements.
Later Saturday, President Trump said he was sending 1,000 military medical personnel to New York City to help respond to the virus.
It was not exactly clear which troops Mr. Trump was referring to. There are already about 1,200 military medical personnel aboard the hospital ship Comfort that is now in New York.
In addition, nearly 2,700 New York State National Guard forces have been deployed to combat the virus, a figure that military officials said they expected to climb 4,000 in the coming days.
At a White House briefing, Mr. Trump asserted that the federal government had been generous to New York, and he said that Mr. Cuomo had not been gracious when the governor held his briefing earlier in the day.
I watched what he said today, and it was fine, Mr. Trump said. I wouldn't say gracious. It wasn't gracious. It was okay.
Mr. Trump singled out Gov. Gavin Newsom of California as someone who has been gracious, and he added that Mayor Bill de Blasio has been very nice.
When the Navy hospital ship USNS Comfort arrived in New York this week, officials intended to use the huge white vessel to treat non-coronavirus patients in order to relieve crowded hospitals onshore.
But on Saturday, Defense Department officials made a startling admission. Several patients suspected of having the coronavirus had been mistakenly taken aboard the ship on Friday, a move that could have big ramifications for efforts to keep the ship free of infection.
The patients were screened on the pier and then tested on board, the Navy said in an email. They were immediately isolated and then transferred to the Javits Convention Center in Manhattan, which began accepting patients with COVID-19 symptoms.
In an email, Defense Department officials stressed that the Comfort continues to focus on treating non-COVID patients. But officials indicated that the ship, having been exposed to the virus, could soon begin treated infected patients in an official capacity.
Navy officials said that at least 3 patients believed to be infected with the coronavirus had been transported to the convention center Saturday morning after having spent the night at the ship.
The Comfort has infection control procedures that are followed just like hospitals ashore, the Navy said in its statement. Our medical experts on board are well prepared for cases like this, and have taken the appropriate precautionary measures.
The Chinese government is facilitating a donation of 1,000 ventilators to New York as the state rushes to increase its supply, Mr. Cuomo said on Saturday.
The governor called the donation really good news, and his office announced later on Saturday that the ventilators had arrived at Kennedy Airport.
This is a big deal, and it's going to make a significant difference for us, the governor said.
The donation came from the Joe and Clara Tsai Foundation, which along with the Jack Ma Foundation also gave an additional 1 million surgical masks and 1 million KN95 masks to the state. Mr. Tsai and Mr. Ma are founders of the Chinese internet giant Alibaba, and Mr. Tsai owns the Brooklyn Nets of the NBA.
Oregon also said that it would send 140 ventilators to New York State.
The ventilator shipments were the latest examples of the lengths that some governors were going to in an effort to acquire much-needed medical equipment and supplies. Noting that, "We're not really China experts here," Mr. Cuomo said the state had reached out for help in navigating its dealings with the country.
Long term, we have to figure out why we wound up in this situation where we don't have the manufacturing capacity in this country, the governor said.
Mr. de Blasio repeated his calls on Saturday for a national enlistment system to help move doctors and health care workers across the country to areas with high need, saying New York City was heading into the toughest time in the weeks ahead.
This is going to be like having many Katrinas, Mr. de Blasio said on MSNBC's AM Joy. This is going to be a reality where you're going to have many cities simultaneously, many states simultaneously in crisis needing healthcare professionals, needing ventilators.
The mayor has said that the city would need 45,000 more medical personnel to fight the pandemic through May.
City-run hospitals in New York desperately need specialized critical care nurses, said Dr. Sheldon H. Tepperman, the director of the trauma center at NYC Health and Hospitals, Jacoby in the Bronx.
The epidemic has thinned their ranks, with nurses themselves falling ill or needed to care for sick family members. If we could get critical care nurses, if volunteers would just come, we could save more lives, Dr. Tepperman said.
New York City education administrators made official on Friday the news more than 75,000 of the city's teachers were dreading amid the pandemic. Spring break is officially canceled.
The news from Department of Education officials angered many teachers who were pleading for a short break during the Passover and Good Friday holidays.
With this step, Mayor de Blasio shows that he does not recognize just how hard you have been working during these stressful and anxiety-filled times, United Federation of Teachers President Michael Mulgrew wrote in a scathing email to his members after officials made the announcement.
The school's chancellor, Richard A. Carranza, promised a reprieve of 4 leave days at an undetermined time in the future.
We recognize this may feel like a disappointment to many students and schools as we have all been working tirelessly in our transition to remote learning and very reasonably want a break, Mr. Carranza wrote in an email to teachers.
New York City's vast system of 1,800 public schools that serves 1.1 million students continues to face its most serious challenge in decades, with a remote learning operation that could potentially last through the end of the school year.
The county executive of Rockland County, New York, said on Saturday he was dumbfounded after the governor and his staff members claimed to not be aware of a request he had made earlier this week to establish a containment zone around part of a town to stop the spread of the coronavirus.
Nobody's asked me, Mr. Cuomo said in response to a question about the request at his daily briefing on Saturday. His top aide, Melissa DeRosa, added that the governor's office was all ears for such requests.
Shortly after Mr. Cuomo's briefing, the county executive, Ed Day, who had made the request for Ramapo, released a strongly worded statement.
To both the governor and secretary to the governor, Melissa DeRosa, how in God's name could you not know of this? He wrote in the statement, to which he also attached a letter dated April 2 that he said he had sent to Mr. Cuomo.
Rockland County, northwest of New York City, has grappled with one of the highest concentrations of virus cases in the state, with about 1 in 75 residents having been reported as testing positive.
Mr. Cuomo previously created a containment area in the small city of New Rochelle. On Saturday, Ms. DeRosa noted that many of the measures that had been put in place there have now been instituted statewide and said the governor's office would reach out to Rockland County.
In his statement, Mr. Day sounded eager for the response. I await a call on my cell, he said. The people of Rockland are beyond fed up.
More than 800,000 residents of the New York region, including New Jersey and Connecticut, have applied for unemployment benefits in the last 2 weeks as the coronavirus pandemic has brought the economy to a virtual standstill.
If you are an employer or a worker who is unemployed, go here to share your story. A reporter or editor may contact you. Your information will not be published without your consent.
Reporting was contributed by Helena Cooper, Melina Delkic, Denise Grady, Thomas Kaplan, Andy Newman, Azzy Pabara, Edgar Sandoval, Eric Schmidt, Matt Stevens and Eliza Shapiro.